All right, section two of an area of study paper, section two of the half yearly, and then section two of paper one in your trial and your HSC is your creative or imaginative piece of writing. And this is often the one that's the most difficult and the most fraught. If anyone tends to fall away in their marks in their HSC for English, it is usually this section because it is simply not practiced enough. And that is one of the key issues that we find in terms of our timings, is to make sure that you get enough practice with this particular section. As you'll note, it's worth exactly what the same as what the others are worth, and that's important. Again, you should always go to this little rubric that's at the top of an examination paper in English. It always tells you what we're going to do in terms of the marking, and that gives you some idea of where to frame your pieces. So it says here your answers will be assessed on how well you express understanding of discovery in the context of your studies, so your understanding, and then organise, develop and express ideas using language appropriate to audience purpose and context. And that is dependent on the type of form that you're writing in. But if you look at it, the language is appropriate in terms of it being a HSC piece of work. Therefore, your English needs to be reasonably sophisticated and strong and engaging. You can't get away with simplistic writing, basic writing, simple sentences and basic structure. You must consider, if you're doing, say, narrative, the value and purpose of dialogue as much as the value and purpose of descriptive writing and indeed critical writing. You'll be asked to refer to an item in the stimulus booklet, and that's important because we can't have you overly pre-plan this. This is not an exam where you can go in saying, I know what I'm going to do. To an extent you do, but you must engage with the question at hand. Therefore, your preparation is much better to go to the rubric, and always go to that rubric and say, what is it in that rubric that actually focuses my attention in terms of what's wanting to be written? This one here that is the past paper. This is not what you'll see, but it says here, create an imaginative piece of writing about a childhood discovery viewed from the perspective of an adult. So it's very, very specific, as you can see there. Childhood discovery viewed from the perspective of an adult. If you've pre-prepared something and walk in with a story ready to go, that's going to throw you markedly. And if you do not answer that particular question in an exam and you just wrote what you prepared, you're just going to hit a C, if you're lucky. So please be careful with that idea. This is not what the idea of an examination is. It's the ability to write a story prepared in terms of the idea of discovery. It says use one of the items on page 7 as the basis for your childhood discovery. So if we go to the actual stimulus booklet here, we go to page 7, here we are. Now page 7 has a couple of items. The first one here, some books, childhood books and childhood toys. So there's obviously the perspective of someone looking at something from their own childhood, and I would imagine that's an adult eye looking back. Here we have item 2, which is a little child looking through a microscope, an adult item. And so you've got possibly the father of this child coming to see a child's awakening at the first time. This is a little bit difficult, this one. It's a forest, and of course this one here is some stars, and the final one is some money. So how do you sort of implement each of those in terms of an adult remembering back to their childhood discovery? Very, very difficult. Pocket money, the first time you actually went camping and saw the night sky, getting lost maybe, or the time you remember getting lost in the forest. As I said, a father looking back at their child, understanding a new part of the world, and you thinking back to your own childhood and the objects that represented it. Each of those have a basis in what you might want to do. And then when you go to the rubric, you see that it talks about discoveries can be new or transformational or collected or imagined, and all these different things that you say, what is it that I'm going to write my story on? And knowing that your story could really just have a basic framework of boy meets girl or discovery in terms of a Bildungsroman, which is a child coming into adulthood, which would be the classic story for you to go for. If it says imaginative writing, yes, you don't need narrative. You can attempt poetry, you can attempt a play, you can attempt an imagined critical work. Each of those is fraught with making sure that you're able to answer the question on the day. My advice to you is to not overly plan a story and walk in with one that you've memorized by rote. That is not going to work for you. Okay, you need to do practiced writing. So here's an example for you to practice to get your writing skills up, and then on the day you're prepared. Okay, that's how it works.